Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you for that introduction. We are very excited to chat with y'all today. If any of you were in the previous Discord session that happened, I think, an hour ago, this is going to be kind of a nice little addition to that information. If you already know about Discord, hopefully you'll learn some other things, especially in terms of building community for your teams at your library through Discord. So yes, you know who we are.
Yeah, we've already done this, but
yes, there it is again. We are both here at the San Antonio Public Library, and very excited to share our experiences that we've had with Discord, and especially serving teams through Discord.
So just to kind of quickly go through what we're going to be doing today, what that actually means, our nice little title. We're starting with a quick overview of our Discord server, what that looks like, where it came from, where it is now. And then we're going to go over into the real main part of this, which will be team community building, which includes things like talking about the server's purpose, guidelines for teams, expectations for staff, what an inclusive environment is, and safety. Then we'll go over a little bit about advocacy for teens in virtual teen services, and we'll leave time for Q&A. So if you have questions, hold on to them. We are definitely leaving some space so that y'all can participate in that way. And we just have a cute little Discord screenshot there. Sometimes they interact at 4 a.m.
And that's totally fine. So we want to give, just a quick overview of the 210 Teen Library Discord server at the San Antonio Public Library. Something that I think we should always mention because we get a lot of questions about it. 210 is the area code for San Antonio. So that's what the 210 means. Doesn't mean anything else, no. But that's what the number 210 comes from. So the 210 Teen Library Discord server was a response to the pandemic. When we were sent home, it was much like many of you who, if you were working at libraries at the time, you were sent home probably and had no idea what to do. And if you were serving teens, really any age group, how do you reach those populations? We were very fortunate to have an awesome group of teen volunteers who really guided us in figuring out the best way to continue serving teens through the library during that time. And those teen volunteers really voiced that Discord was going to be the place to be, not Zoom, not Microsoft Teams, not Instagram, that Discord was where they were already meeting, where they were already comfortable meeting. It already met their interests and needs. And really that was going to be a place that we could serve them, not just in programming, but in other aspects as well. So we did a soft launch of the server in April 2020, and did a real big launch with the summer program that year in June 2020, and it's been going strong ever since. It's gone through many changes. It's not the same as when it first started, and really a lot of that has happened in response to what the teens are asking for through the server. So we're going to share some screenshots and talk a little bit about the context of the server. But what we definitely want to impart upon all of you is that what we're sharing here in these next few slides is just a snapshot of what Discord could look like for you and your teens. It is certainly not the be-all, end-all. It's going to always, of course, depend on the teens that are part of your community. So just because our teens are interacting in one way or fashion on our server doesn't mean that that's how it's going to happen on your server. And it really ultimately shouldn't. It should reflect the teens that are on your server, the teens that are in your community, and the needs that they're expressing, that whatever it is that they're looking for through their library experience.
Okay, so Rainbow Ballroom was talking about teens and what their needs are, was a request via teens through our suggestion channel of, we want a space for specifically LGBTQ topics. And we said, okay, well, what should we call it? And we came up with a poll, and they chose Rainbow Ballroom, which has a nod to a specific part of LGBTQ history, which is great. So these screenshots in the purple, you have a teen created an art graphic for school about coming out day. And that's just amazing that they decided to share it here on our server, and that another teen was like, oh my gosh, that's right. There's this in another media example. So they started talking about examples of queer couples in media, which is great. On the bottom left, the yellow square, it's just one of the ways that Rainbow Ballroom gets used is someone will just post in it and be like, I had this wonderful thing happen and I just want to talk about it. And in this case, someone got on HRT, and so they're recommending a clinic they went to, and they're very excited about it. And everybody's just like, yay, heart react. Then the teal square on the right is the other kind of interaction we tend to see in this channel, which is intense conversations. You may not be able to read this right now, but I know you'll get the slides later. Someone is asking about what romance is and like dealing with that in an abro couple, an aromantic person dating, just wonderfully intense conversations. So that's kind of what you can end up with Rainbow Ballroom.
Yeah, and as Shannon mentioned, I know most of you should be getting this slide deck later on. This is also available on a LibGuide that we have, and we'll have that link at the end of our presentation as well. So if you're unable to see the screenshots clearly on your side, those will be available for you to see later. So another example, again, is just the community that's formed on our Discord server as another channel that was born from teen suggestions, which is called All the Feels. So teens were really looking for a space to vent about either, things that were going on in their life, or maybe just something they're really excited to share about. So this All the Feels channel became a separate space because those teens wanted to communicate things away from the general chat. So they didn't want to clog up the general chat with things that might be intense, or maybe that they didn't think fit into the general, maybe if there's other conversations going on. So they asked for this space. So in All the Feels, we really truly see all the feels.
Yeah, the whole range.
from happy things, teens sharing about successes in their life, to just things that are getting them down, or things that might have happened at school or with their friends. So you can see here on the screenshots on the left side, just a teen who is very proud of themselves for being able to communicate their issues and using coping skills. And you can see the reactions underneath some of those messages. And so those are other teens acknowledging these things. In this channel, there are different ways that teens can indicate how they want other teens to respond. So sometimes they may indicate, oh, I'm not really looking for anyone to give me advice or something, but just a reaction is nice. So you can see that teens do follow that. And they're just, kind of acknowledging that teen's success. On the right-hand side, you can see kind of an opposite side of the interaction, where a teen is having, maybe not the best day at school. And you can see, of course, we have the names blurred out there for our teens' privacies. You can see lots of teens kind of chiming in there, trying to offer different ways that maybe that this teen who's having a panic attack at school, that they can maybe cope with that. So All the Feels is really one of the most used channels on the server in terms of really building those connections with one another. It's a very safe space, and it's grown immensely since we first launched since the teens first asked for it, and since it launched to now. They really drive to that channel to share experiences with each other, whether it's a positive or a negative experience.
One of the original programs we've had on our server almost since the beginning, and has been consistently one of the most popular, has been Dungeons and Dragons. If you work with teens, you've probably had teens ask for a Dungeons and Dragons game. They're really great. On the left-hand side, what you can see is there's a teen who almost every week on the day of D&D is so excited, they make a post. D&D today, and other teens will react. And of course, that's me announcing that we're going to have game in 15 minutes and 16 minutes. And the teen then replies with soon. In the middle, you see what I love about our D&D program is that teens have really taken control of it. I run a game on Wednesdays, but there are currently about 3 other games that teens are running independent of staff. I'm not connected to them. No other staff member is. They figure it all out. Like on the right-hand side, that blue squared screenshot, that's them figuring out scheduling a one-shot. I didn't tell them to do this. They figured this out on their own. But in the middle, you see also they're brainstorming. I had given them a challenge like, hey, before next session, can you think about ideas for this? And they did. And one teen even like drew an idea and posted it, and teens are talking about. So you see them not just being creative and like problem solving, but also becoming their own like leaders. And it's really inspiring.
And the last screenshots that we'll share is our art channel, which also has been around since the beginning of the server. As I'm sure many of you probably experience in-person libraries, teens love to share their art. Sometimes that's digital art or sketches. It could be really anything. And on the server, that's even the ways that they share their art is you can't even imagine. So here are just 2 examples of different kinds of artwork that were shared. And again, you can see both reactions from teens. So, just using the little emoji reactions, but as well as the conversations that happen after, asking follow-up questions about techniques, or the materials that were used to create the art. You can see the different teen interactions that happen there. So again, it's another space where they feel comfortable to share these things. They feel comfortable talking about their expertise in artwork. And hopefully what you've seen really through these past 4 slides of screenshots, aside from the one interaction from Shannon, is there's not a lot of staff interaction here, right? So that's kind of where we're headed in our discussion with y'all today, is how important it is that really these interactions that are happening on these very different channels. And this is, again, just a quick snapshot of some of the channels that we have.
So many.
We have tons and tons of channels. And when I say we, the teens really have tons of channels on the server that they've requested. But you can see that it's really a teen-centered server, that it's teens interacting with teens, building those relationships with one another, building those connections with one another. And staff are really just there to help facilitate things as needed. So you can see, again, with the art, that just like with Dungeons and Dragons and just with All the Feels and Rainbow Ballroom, teens are really gravitating to these spaces and using them in ways that make sense to them in San Antonio, at the San Antonio Public Library.
So what teen community building, we've said this a couple of times, we said this is what we're talking about today. What that looks like will be different on each server. So we don't really want to get into like, you need to do this, you need to do this exact little thing. That's not what we're here for. These are general ideas that are usually very beneficial for any Discord server, that no matter what shape it takes. We want to make sure that you are establishing your best practices, that you're setting groundwork that will help build a strong server that can last and can be flexible to the changes in your teen population and in their needs. So that it stays being a vibrant space for them over time. And so we have just a quick little screenshot here. We had a teen mod, so we have teen moderators. A teen mod aged out this week, and it was very sad because they'd been a very big part of the server. And so I think they worked with a staff member of like, how do we want to do this? How do we want to say goodbye? And so they made a big announcement, and teens were chiming and like, oh my gosh, no.
An era has ended.
Yes.
So again, just just really a snapshot of the ways that teens have built relationships with one another, and celebrate each other, whether they're aging out, whether it's their birthday, whether they just passed a test, or even if it's something that's maybe not as positive, that there really is a community that has been built on this server.
And that's really like the virtual equivalent of a physical space, because this would be happening in your teen space, in your library. A teen would come in and be like, it's my birthday, covered in birthday swag. And the other teens would be like, whoa. So that's really what we want to talk about, is the key components of a server. And the big one is what the purpose of your server is.
Absolutely. So we don't know exactly where everybody is, maybe in terms of maybe you already have a Discord server for your teens at your library. Perhaps this is the first time you're starting to think about it, or maybe you've been getting questions from teens about starting one at your library system. But if you already have one, or whether you are thinking about starting one, if you haven't had a moment to think about the server's purpose, we really implore you to do that. And really that comes down to 3 kinds of questions. What is the purpose of the server? When is that server accessible, and who's going to be on that server? So the purpose of the server, in terms of, we're thinking of teen services, virtual teen services for teens at the library. What is the purpose? Is this virtual space just another way to provide programming? Perhaps, maybe is it another space for them to hang out? Perhaps, maybe it's a combination of those 2 things, or perhaps to also extend different library services that aren't possible in person. Those questions are ultimately going to come down to you. And of course, depending on your library system, how many staff members are going to be available to help you out with the server. If you're just the lone teen services librarian at your library system, you may not be able to extend that purpose as far as you may want to. Whereas, we here at the San Antonio Public Library are very fortunate that we have a team of about 15 librarians who are on the server. So we are able to really kind of accomplish a lot, because we have a lot of people kind of helping out with all different kinds of things. So the purpose of the server is really going to be crucial, because that's going to be able to guide you to figure out how teens can take ownership of, participate on, and invest in the server. As you can see, we're headed down towards the end of this slide. So once you figure out the purpose of the server, whether it's just for programming, whether it's for programming and a virtual space, all those kinds of things, you need to figure out, when is the server going to be accessible? There's, again, we're not here to tell you what's right or wrong or best or worst, because there are many ways that these servers exist. You've probably heard of many library systems that have a Discord server. They all operate differently. So when is it accessible? Is it open 24/7? Perhaps. Is it only open during library hours? Maybe. Again, those are questions that you'll need to figure out depending on the staff that are available, and of course, chatting with your library administration to see what makes the most sense for your library system. But determining when the server is going to be accessible is really going to help you be able to understand how teams are going to, again, own that space, participate on the space, and invest in the space. And finally, who is on the server? Certainly teams. The nice thing about Discord is that it does through Discord's not because of the library, not because of anything else, but Discord's own regulations do state that users must be 13 to create an account. So here at the San Antonio Public Library, teen services, we serve teens 13 to 18. So that works really well for us. So certainly teens will be on the server, but again, thinking about who's going to be on the server as well as those teens. Are you able to enlist teen volunteers? As we do, we have teen mods, as Shannon mentioned, who are volunteers. They earn volunteer hours for helping moderate on the server whenever staff aren't available. They help run or lead virtual clubs that happen on the server. They also do other extra activities throughout the server, host their own things. So can you use teen volunteers? Do you have a group of teen volunteers who can assist? Again, what staff members are available? Is it just going to be you? Do you have other staff members who can help and support you? Those kinds of questions, again, are all going to lead to this idea of teen ownership, of participation on and investment in the server. And ultimately, that's what we hope to instill upon all of you, is that the server's purpose is really to create a space where teens can come in and own that space, where they can come in and understand that this is just an extension of the library space in the physical realm. It's just now happening virtually. So hopefully in your physical locations, your teens are able to walk into a teen space at the library that they feel is for them. We want to definitely replicate that virtually. We want to make sure that the server's purpose allows them to participate on the server in a way that makes sense to them, whether that's, if they come because there's tons of really cool clubs that they're into, or whether they want to just chat with other teens in their city, making sure that the purpose of the server really reflects that it's a place for them to participate. And then ultimately, the server's purpose is a place for them to invest. Just like we want teens to invest in their own library experience, whenever they come visit us in person, we want them to come in and feel comfortable and feel like it's a safe space for them to exist. We want them to have that same kind of investment in the server.
And so part of, you have a clear purpose, that's great. You need to have guidelines for your teens. Y'all probably are very familiar that rules are often used against teens, often used to push them out of spaces or dictate their behavior in negative ways, which is why I'm not saying rules here, I'm saying guidelines. But guidelines are super, super important because these protect not just the teens, but also staff. These make sure that we all know what's the behavior expectation on this server. And that's why you want to include teen voices in your guidelines, make sure that they are the ones guiding this. So if everybody's okay with a certain level of behavior, then shouldn't be in the guidelines, don't need that. But if there's another thing that comes up, then you definitely want to. And that's something is you want to make sure your guidelines are a living document. You want to reevaluate these every time something new comes up that maybe isn't covered by the guidelines, look at it. Hey, maybe do we need to address this? Does this need to be added? Do we need to change some of the wording here? So let it grow, let it be organic, let it be flexible. And that's kind of a key to Discord in general, is allowing it to be a flexible space really helps it become successful. So yeah, include teen voices in those guidelines. Make sure that you aren't being another voice telling teens, this is how you have to be and not what helps them. Guidelines should be helpful. They should be, what's the word? Impactful is a terrible word, but it discusses it in a way. Your guidelines need to be very, very welcoming. And so that's why you want to acknowledge the potential for disruptive behavior rather than assume. Put stuff in there, in case something happens. Yes, we understand that if this happens, these are some of the things that might happen. Don't go straight to, how dare you, this is the end of everything. Consider, it's the giving into rules as dictation for teens. So you want to make sure that you're not expecting bad behavior from them. You're just saying, hey, if you do this, here are some of the repercussions. And that's why, again, you need teen voices so they know this is the line that we're comfortable with. So you put your line to that line. And that's why you also want to maybe consider the Discord rules screening feature. You can look this up. It's a very easy thing to Google. But basically, when you are getting new members joining your server, it pops up the rules when they first join, and it shows like, hey, here's all of the guidelines to this server, and you have to interact with that. You have to hit like a check, I agree, or yes, I saw this, before it'll even let them into the server proper. So that's a nice way to say like, well, you know, when you joined, you did have to click that. Do they read it? We don't always know. You can't, unfortunately, force anybody to read anything. That's library life. But that rule screening is just another level of protection for you and for your teams to say like, well, you joined, you read these. And that's also why you want to make sure your guidelines are accessible somewhere on your server, just in a channel. Make it so that people can't interact with it, maybe, so they can't like react on it or something. But so that teens also can point to it, because we've had teens who say, hey, you know, what you're doing is maybe not cool. Did you check in the guidelines that says you can't do that? And another teen will be like, oh, I had no idea. So having guidelines visible is beneficial for your teens, because they can actually point back to them and be like, look, it says this. Or they can point out like, hey, you misspelled something here, but that's a whole other thing. And of course, as important as it is to have guidelines for teens, you want to have expectations for staff.
Absolutely. So yeah, just as important as it is to acknowledge the space, right, for its purpose of being there for the teens, we want to make sure that staff also understand that just as much. So again, right, we talked about this when we're looking at the screenshots, really ensuring that staff understand that the point is to center teen voices in the conversations on the server. So that's really, you know, a big part of the success of the server, much like you may experience in person. And we certainly try to parallel things to the in-person experience of teens at the library as much as possible. So, you know, imparting on your staff that there may be, you know, depending on how big your server is and the different topics and channels and things that teens are talking about, there may be probably lots of conversations that you as a staff member feel like, oh, hey, I have something to contribute. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should, because again, as we showed through our screenshots, the beauty of these Discord interactions with one another. And so whenever staff jump into those conversations, or even just whenever staff are present on the server all the time, you know, that can really change how the experience is for teens that are on the server. So showing your staff that the expectation is that teens take precedent on the server, which should hopefully also be the case of the in-person experience, is very key. So that comes down to, right, establishing those boundaries for what staff can do or are expected to do on the server. So thinking back on the purpose of the server, you know, if the server really is existing for programming purposes, you know, staff are going to be there to run those programs or facilitate those programs, or hopefully just facilitate with another team leading the program. That's really great. The boundaries for when they should or should not be on the server, you know, certainly recommending staff be on there during library hours and not at midnight is probably a great idea. You know, those kinds of boundaries. So just that staff are aware of, you know, when they should be on there, how they should present themselves on there. There's a number of ways that you can interact on the server. You can also hide yourself as invisible, so you can check in on the server, see how things are going, but not show yourself as an active member. So again, so that you can preserve those moments where, you know, we don't want teens to feel like there's 20 staff members on the server and that it's really not a teen space. It's really just a space for staff to be on. So establishing those boundaries is going to be really key. And really the best way to do that is provide resources and education on how staff should interact. So you may be able to already imagine it, but interacting with teens virtually is very different than in person. Yeah, it's completely different. You know, you may find that you are more comfortable or less comfortable interacting virtually. You know, in the virtual space, depending on if, you know, maybe you already use social media or other, you know, things or communities that are on the internet, you know, maybe you're comfortable sending GIFs or using emojis or, you know, just doing reactions. If you're not, that's going to be, or if other staff members that are on the server are not, you know, that's going to certainly be a learning curve. It's not the end of the world, but providing those resources and education for staff to understand the best ways to interact with teens virtually. Certainly also taking into consideration of any library policies for staff, open records requests, those kinds of things, if those exist in your library system, are things to take into account. Again, just making sure that your staff understand what are the ways that are appropriate or inappropriate for them to be on the server and interacting with other teens. And just like with the guidelines for teens, creating those opportunities for communication and checking in, because just like your teens are going to grow within the server, they're going to, ask for changes on the server, they're going to try new things. Your staff are also going to experience things. And certainly if you have 10, 15 staff members, everyone's going to have a different experience on the server. So they may find, something happening that you're not aware of. And so having those opportunities, whether it's, if you and your group are on Microsoft Teams, or if you just have a monthly meeting or whatever it may be, having points of contact for your staff to chat about the experience as well, because absolutely it is 100% teen focused, but we want to make sure that staff are also able to support the teens that are on the server, and making sure that, whatever your staff are doing, maybe they see something that's not really working out, creating those opportunities for staff to come together and communicate about it and make sure that, the purpose of the server isn't on a tangent in any kind of way, shape, or form.
And part of creating expectations, creating guidelines, all of those things are protective, but creating an inclusive environment is really, really crucial to creating a vibrant community on Discord. And one of the simplest ways you can do that is account customization, allowing teens to change their nicknames inside your servers, maybe not having them have to use their real names. Maybe they have a preferred name. Maybe they just have a nickname they use everywhere, and it's not the name that they give you in their application or, in school. Allowing them just that little bit of freedom already. And then there are easy ways to add in pronoun options, to add in other kinds of customizations, not even just pronouns. We have a bunch of roles that are on our server that teens have come up with, like pineapple or no pineapple on pizza. That's a role that you can opt in on. And those make it inclusive in multiple ways, because then you're encouraging the teens to come up with ways to customize their encounters with Discord. And of course, because Discord is virtual, it can be a safer space than a physical space can be. Teens may be trying on identities, they may be trying on pronouns, and it may be easier to do that through Discord than face-to-face, which can be pretty intimidating sometimes. And that's why you really want to make sure you're collecting and implementing teen suggestions. Have a suggestions channel, have some way for teens to tell staff, hey, this is something that I want, this is something that I need on this server. Can you do that? The great thing about a suggestions channel or something in that way is teens will start talking to each other about an idea. A teen will be like, hey, why don't we have a Yu-Gi-Oh channel? And then 5 other teens will be like, oh my God, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or there's been periodic questions about adding ages onto the server. And without staff even having to say, I don't know, if maybe we shouldn't do that. Other teens have talked in to say, I don't know that that's comfortable. So a suggestions channel is another way, or something along those lines, giving them the room to give suggestions and to actively brainstorm. Is creating a way for communities of interest to emerge. Hey, I didn't know you liked Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament. You're letting them realize connections between each other, which is again allowing for customization, and it's allowing for including everybody and all their interests and all their identities, and how those interact with each other. Which is why you also want to make sure teens feel comfortable participating at whatever level that is. Some teens may never join a program if you run programs on your server. They may only ever chat in text. They may never join a voice chat. And those should be things you consider. Is it okay for them to not join a voice chat if you're doing a program using the voice channel? Can they join and just listen in? And you have to consider too, some teens may not be able to speak, may have trouble vocalizing, or they're in an environment where they can listen, but they can't talk. So having those allowances, they seem like little bitty things, but they really add up into creating an inclusive environment where teens will actually feel comfortable. Because if you give them these options, if you let them build, you might have teens leading programs, coming up with ideas. Let's have an art contest. What does that look like? So you really letting them participate at that comfort level, and letting them identify, letting them change and modify the entire server is what creates that inclusive environment. And of course, part of inclusivity is safety, which is what we're going to talk about next.
Absolutely. So certainly safety is important both virtually for sure and just as well as in person, right? So again, always looking for those parallels. Want to make sure that our teens feel safe, and safe can mean a lot of number of things. But what we're going to talk about here is really just keeping the server, again, it's a teen space and only for teens, and the best ways to make sure that they feel comfortable when they're on that space. So limiting public access to the server is absolutely key. For a number of reasons, as you can imagine. You don't want to just have the link to join the Discord server just out in the open so that anyone can join, because then you're not going to know who's actually joining the server. So limiting public access to the server is going to come in many different forms. And again, if you've done any research or looked at other systems, or maybe you already have your Discord set up, the most common way you'll find it through library systems is some sort of form that teens can sign up through. What is going to be collected on that form is, again, going to be ultimately up to you and perhaps your library administration team and what they deem necessary to collect. Whether that's if a library card is necessary or not necessary to join the server. Again, looking for those parallels in the in-person world. And whenever a teen enters a space, for example, here at the San Antonio Public Library, we don't check for a library card to have a teen come into the teen space at their local library. So we want to mirror that as much as possible. So whatever information you're going to collect it in a form, and then that way you and your staff can review who is asking to access the server. And then from there, they can be invited privately through a one-time use link to join the server. So that is really going to be the best way that you can have teens join the server in a safe manner. And then once they're, of course, on the server, offering those ways for teens to feel safe and secure. So certainly that comes with those guidelines, making sure that that's one of the very first things that they see when they join the server, so they understand what the space is and what it isn't. Just like, when a teen comes into the library space, you probably have seen teens that maybe it's their first time coming into the library, and maybe they're just a little shy, or maybe they're just not sure what to do or not to do in this space. So offering those initial points of contact for them to feel safe and secure and understand, oh, this is a place for me. They have these things set up for me. Oh, great, I can set my pronouns here. That makes me feel safe because I know that people are going to respect me in this space. So just those little points that we've already kind of communicated, making sure that they understand as soon as the very first things that they see on the server are these things that are going to help them feel safe and secure and want to stay on the server. We certainly encourage providing information about general online safety tips, because what we found is that just like our teens in person, right? Again, I'm always talking about the parallel. Once you have a great teen group in person, they get very comfortable and they want to start sharing things, and maybe they're going to different schools and things like that. But we want to make sure that in the online world that they're also still being mindful of those things. So general safety tips, right? Whether it's just letting them know in the guidelines, this is still, this is a library space, of course, and we protect everybody's privacy, but also be mindful about what you're posting, not encouraging them to post those specifics about maybe where they live in the city or what school they attend, those kinds of things. Just encouraging them to think about what they post, because even though it is a closed server, right, if you have it limited in that way, even though it is a library space, we still want to make sure that our teens are being safe and understand that anytime, whether they're interacting with the library or whether they're using some other social media platform, that they should be mindful about what they're posting online. And ultimately posting contact information for library staff so that teens know that if something does happen, if they feel uncomfortable or something's going on the server, that they know the ways that they can contact library staff, so that they know at the end of the day that there is a group of staff that are there to help, and certainly also teen mods, the volunteers that are there, if you have those on your server as well, just ways that they know that they're not alone if something were to happen, that they do have other people there to support them through those moments of any kind of uncomfortable or unsafe things that hopefully won't happen, but just so that they know.
And so that more or less covers a lot of the key points that we think are really important to, I just said important twice, that are so crucial to making a Discord server a community, and a community that reflects the physical teen space and all of its wonderful facets, but just virtually. But advocacy is one of our major jobs as teen services librarians. So one of the key things that we need to be doing is making sure that we raise teen voices, that we are making space for them, whether that's virtually or physically, whether that's learning how to cook or play Mario Kart, and that we're always centering teen voices. Our agenda is their agenda. I may have my pet projects and my interests, but until a teen says, I want to do this, and I can be like, okay, here's all my resources to help you with that, it doesn't matter. It does not matter that I like that. We are always needing to make sure that we're looking at what our teens want and what our teens need, and how can we help them achieve those goals, no matter what they are. So that's why it's teen ownership, it's teen participation, it's teen investment. If you show them, hey, this is about you, you own this space, they'll be more interested in participating. They'll be more interested in actually investing in making this a more interesting and safe and happy place for other teens to interact in. And that's why you really need to be responsive to teen communities of interest. If you see a little bubble of things popping up in your teen group of like, hey, they really like this one thing. What if we open that up? And then you will see this beautiful thing happen. And that's why you need to make sure you're paying attention to that. One of the beautiful things about a virtual space is that it just completely gets rid of problems of transportation. You know, if a teen doesn't have a car, if they can't drive, if their parents can't drive or can't take them, you know, if they can't get on the bus, all of those things are gone, because you can get on Discord on your phone, you can get Discord on a tablet, you can get Discord everywhere. You can easily get on it at a library computer. And that also gets rid of location issues because, you know, sometimes in a library system, you'll have one branch is having a really cool program, but it's all the way on the east side of town. And some of the teams are like, oh, I can't make that. I live up on the northeast side of town. There's no way I'll get across. So you disregard that entire problem. Anybody can join Discord from anywhere. And of course, physical buildings. There's all kinds of limitations with the physical space. We know this. Teens can get loud, can get rambunctious. You may not have a very large teen space, so you may not be able to host many teens. And none of that's a problem on Discord. You can host as many teens as your server allows, which is a lot. It's a lot. So, and this is not just Discord, but any kind of virtual service where you are advocating for teens. These are things that are really, really great. And when you are working with a virtual space, you actually are capturing a different population than you would be getting in the physical space. So that's another thing, is you're reaching a need. This is something to consider when you are going to your library administration, when you're going to library stakeholders, the library board, whoever you need to talk to about getting a Discord server or some kind of virtual service for your teens. These are things you really need to make sure you prioritize in telling them, is that this is not just a cool thing that teens like, which is already valid, that's enough, but that it's something that they want, it's something that they need. It breaks down a lot of barriers to access, and you're capturing a whole other population of teens that you wouldn't see otherwise. And that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. So with advocacy, you know, and again, in terms of, we're not 100% sure, everybody that's on the call, whether you already have a server perhaps for your teens, or again, you're thinking about starting one, or maybe you have teens who are really interested in helping you get that started. These 4 points right here, and certainly the rest of the presentation that we've presented, and again, we're going to share in just a second a LibGuide link with even more resources and information about our specific server and other best practices that we found. At the end of the day, it's really getting your teens involved in the server. So if you don't have a group of teens at your library who are really interested in this, you know, maybe that's a sign that at this time it's not the best. You know, really, again, it's putting out those breadcrumbs to see if you have teens who may think that this is a good idea for your library system. So getting that ownership, that participation, that investment is really going to lead to that buy-in. So we really encourage you to, again, think about the purpose of the server. If you already have one, or if you're thinking about starting one, think about what the purpose is, really tying the teens in your community in and seeing what it is that they want out of that. Again, as Shannon said, you may have a million great ideas about what a Discord server for teens could look like. Certainly, I'm sure many of us in this call could do that. But ultimately, if it's not what your teens are asking for, it's what they're not looking for, it's not going to resonate with them. And that would, you know, really at the end of the day, would be a disservice to those teens. So again, really tuning in with your teens, really chatting with them, really figuring it out what it is that they want out of a virtual library experience, because it may be something completely different than the experience that we presented through our screenshots, right? Your teens may come up with crazier, more extravagant ideas of what they want their Discord server to look like. So really listen to that. That's what we really want to impart you with, is to really listen to that and get them involved, because whether or not you have the support of your library team already, your administrative or IT or whoever it may be, getting your teams involved in those processes is really going to help you communicate the need that this is not only something that they want, but as we've come to find with our Discord server, it's now an expected library service. Whenever we were going through those first few months, and it was like, I think August of 2020, our teams on the server were really nervous that we were going to shut it down after things. Yeah.
They were like, it's gonna stay, right? If we go back to school.
And we were like, absolutely, if you want the Discord server to stay, absolutely it will stay. So, again, that buy-in from them communicated to us that this was not just a fad, this wasn't just a passing thing, a band-aid during the pandemic, but now we've really built this exceptional service for, as Shannon mentioned, new teens. We routinely get teams that indicate on our form that they don't go to San Antonio Public Library locations, that this is really their first experience with the library. We certainly view our server as an additional library branch. The way it operates and runs, we have plenty of staff on there, as I mentioned earlier. So it's, for us, it is now embedded within teen services at the San Antonio Public Library, which is really awesome, because at the end of the day, again, it really came from teens communicating that need to us. We knew that we had to do something during the pandemic. We had to have some kind of response in providing services to them, but they really came up and made it what it is today, and continue to make it what it is today through every suggestion that they give us, through every activity that they participate on. They're always coming up with new ways, certainly always making us learn new things, which we love, because they're always the first to notice when there's new features on Discord, and they tell us about them. When something's broken, they're the ones that they tell us how to fix it. So again, it really imparts on them that we are here as facilitators. We are here because we are librarians who support them in this new space. But really, at the end of the day, they're the ones who own the space. They're the ones who are driving the space forward. And throughout the rest of, whether Discord is popular for 1 more year or for 5 more years, however long, until the new thing comes along, we'll be there to support them if it continues to be something that they want supported at their library.
Well, that's about it. So thanks for listening to us talk. Now it's your turn. We will make sure to pull up the chat windows if you need to put questions in through chat. We have that up so we can see those. Or you're welcome to unmute and ask questions. We're happy to answer. This is your time. As you might see on the slide, we have our email addresses. You're welcome to email us with questions, concerns, comments, recommendations, all of the things, favorite tea. And there's also the LibGuide that we mentioned earlier. This is our LibGuide on our Discord and how we do various things so that you can see an example. Again, don't use it as a template. If it's not what works for your server, don't use it. But it can help to have an idea of what it might look like.
Yeah. All right. There we go. Yeah. All right, so we have a question. What are your server's hours? Is it always monitored by staff, or do moderators fill in solo as well? Our server's hours it is open 24/7. So our server, we don't shut it down, and there are certainly ways that you can do that. There are some library systems and other teen serving organizations that we work with that do change the visibility of the server during certain hours. So our server is open 24/7, and it is monitored by staff during business hours. So during our normal business hours, we're open 7 days a week, some days later, some days earlier. So anytime when the library is open, we do have staff in some way or fashion checking in on the server. We don't have it staffed like you might think, like a reference desk. So we don't have like a set schedule where, Shannon's on at a certain time, I'm on at a certain time, those kinds of things. But we do have staff routinely checking in. We do have an Ask a Librarian channel where teens go in and ask questions, whether it's a reference question or a silly question, on anything like that. So we do have staff checking on those to answer questions. Certainly also get questions about like clubs and things like that. But yes, we do have moderators as well who fill in on their own. So those are our moderators on the server, our teen volunteers. So they've gone through our background check and serve just like our in-person volunteers. They serve just like that and earn hours and all those kinds of things. And we meet with them regularly to also just check in with them, just like we do with our staff. As I mentioned earlier, we have regular check-ins with our teen mods to make sure that they're also aware of things that are going on, or if they've noticed things that maybe we've missed. And just like our staff, our moderators are not on a set schedule either. They're kind of on the understanding that they are there to kind of fill in some of those gaps of whenever staff aren't available, but we don't have them on a set schedule either. They kind of come up with their own schedule because we want to give them that independence of being able to figure out what works for them. You know, many of them are involved in extracurriculars and things like that. So we want to give them the space to figure out what works best for them. So it's a mix of staff being on there and moderators being on there. And then ultimately, you know, within the community that the teens have built on the server, they're also very supportive of one another. So as Shannon mentioned, you know, if there happens to be no staff or moderators present, you know, teens on the server will happily point to guidelines, or they'll look up things for each other and say, oh, looks like D&D next week is at 5 p.m. Yeah. You can message Shannon if you have questions about joining for the first time. So they're also kind of aware of where on the server they can find answers to help each other out.
Yes. Okay. How do you go about advocating for teens to have a Discord server if that's what they want with library admin? Well, that's partially what that advocacy slide is all about, is going with, depending on your library, depending on your admin, you want to approach it from the side of this is serving a population, and in fact, grabbing a new population that you're not getting in the physical space, that it helps minimize or completely to break down barriers of access, including, you know, transportation and location, that it's something that the population is asking for actively. So, you know, that's super important. You know, anytime we try to get a new service in libraries, you always have to tell people, like, this is what they want, this is what they need. So Discord is not just, you know, a social media that teens are into. It's an actual program. It is an actual function that can be part of the library and its services.
Yeah, and you know, we went back and forth about what to and what not to include in this presentation. But certainly if you go to this LibGuide, you know, our hope is, you know, the experience that we've had, again, at the San Antonio Public Library is a unique experience to our teens, you know, the teens that joined the server, that have continued to support the server, that continue to participate on the server. They've really made it what it is. But on our LibGuide, that's right here on this slide, if you go to it, we have additional information, one being statistics. Thank you for posting that. We have additional statistics and reports that you can also show, because what we would also like to hopefully do is, for those of you who may be struggling to advocate for this Discord server for your teens with library administration, is to show, you know, again, just as an example, not that this is going to happen at your library system, but what if other library systems have experienced, you can see the different things that have happened. For example, in the past fiscal year, we had 21% of teens, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but 21% of teens who joined the server indicated that they had never been to a San Antonio Public Library location. So that's pretty huge. If we're talking about, you know, reaching new teens who don't normally see the library as a place for them, 21% of those teens had never been to the library, but now are participating with their library system in this new way. That's really awesome. You know, we hear a lot of times, right, that, oh, teens just don't want to come hang out at the library. They don't want to hang out at my library. And maybe they don't. Maybe they don't want to go in person. As Shannon mentioned, maybe they don't feel comfortable going into the library because the way that they are there, or the way that they represent themselves physically, doesn't really match with how they're feeling or how they want to present themselves. But giving them this virtual space where they can kind of fine tune that a little bit might make it more accessible to them. It might make it an easier way for them to start getting connected with the library. And hopefully, eventually, maybe they will make that connection to, oh, you know what, now I know Shannon. I've chatted with Shannon on the server. Shannon's at this library branch. I kind of want to go in now. I feel a little more comfortable going in. So, you know, again, finding those connections. So we hope that our LibGuide with the resources that we presented on there can certainly help you if you are having that struggle with your library administration.
Got another question. How did you first make that connection with the population interested in Discord, and how would you recommend we begin to drop those breadcrumbs? We were lucky that when the pandemic first started, we had teens already asking for Discord. They had already been in our physical libraries, been saying, hey, this is a cool thing that we think you should do. And then we had, luckily, a group of teens that one of the librarians at one of our branches was already still in contact with. They met on, I think, Zoom, right? They were doing like teen time on Zoom, and they said, please, let's make a Discord. And they were really influential in helping us getting it set up and some of our initial bot choices and things like that. So that was definitely part of it, was we already had teens who were asking for Discord.
Yeah, and I don't want to answer the breadcrumb question, but that just reminded me of just a side note as well, in terms of advocating for Discord specifically, because what you may find, and we've certainly, when we've had conversations with other library systems, we know that some library systems during the pandemic, during the peaks of the pandemic, were meeting with their teens through Zoom or maybe through Microsoft Teams or some other thing like that. The importance of using Discord as opposed to Zoom, for example, here we're in this Zoom call, we're all in the Zoom call, we can see who's in this call, there's a chat window, we're sharing our screen, but ultimately, when this is over, it goes away. I think we're all going to get a recorded copy of this presentation. That's great. You can watch it later, but you can't really interact with it later. So the great thing about Discord, and again, advocating for Discord specifically as opposed to something like Zoom, is that it really exists in this perpetual nature, right? It's always going on. There's always a way that teens can come back. If there's a D&D session that I miss and I'm a teen, and I can go back in there the next day and kind of catch up on some of the things that happened. So that's why it's really important to use something like Discord that allows teens to feel like they're part of a space that doesn't go away, as opposed to a Zoom call, which if you miss the call, you're not really able to revisit it. In terms of dropping those breadcrumbs, it's really going to just be those casual conversations you have with your teens, whether it's during a normal program maybe that you have, or new teens that are visiting your library or your space for the first time. Ultimately, the way to approach it, I think the best way to approach it is not just, maybe perhaps, again, it depends on the relationship you have with those teens. If you can have a casual conversation and just ask them, if they use Discord, if they've heard of Discord, if they're interested in doing stuff virtually, do they have, access to that at home? Because of course that's a big thing, and we acknowledge that, although Discord is accessible on a laptop, on a cell phone, on a tablet, maybe they don't have those connections at home. Maybe they don't have those devices at home, which doesn't mean that you can't do it. As Shannon mentioned earlier, you can certainly do things through the library computers as well. But, just kind of asking those preliminary questions to see if that's something they, want to do. What is it like? You stay at home and I watch, YouTube streams or Twitch streams. I like to game with my friends online. It's just really asking those preliminary questions, and then certainly at some point asking if there is any interest in Discord. If you find those teens who do think it's an interesting idea, that's really your opportunity to kind of turn the spotlight on them and ask them if they would develop the server. Of course, with you along the ride, you're there to facilitate and help, but really putting them in the spotlight and asking them, well, what would that Discord server look like? And then from there, hopefully, they will allow you to really make that a special place for the teens in your community. And yes, there's a New England Teen Librarians Discord as well. So certainly you can join that to meet with other colleagues about their Discord experiences.
Which there are quite a few librarian Discords out there. I do recommend them. They're all pretty great, the ones I've joined. People share recommendations for bots, share commiserations on why didn't this work? Why can't I get this to stick to one channel? All those like little mechanical problems that you run into with Discord. It's a nice community for that. So I recommend joining a Discord or two if you want to run a Discord. It helps a whole lot. So we have from Daniela, do you think it will fade as an interest with your community or teens in general at some point? Would there be other platforms libraries could use in the same way as Discord to give teens the power over their experience at the library? That's a good question. I wish I knew whether we would have Discord forever or not. If it's the way of many media platforms, more than likely at some point we will see them stop using it. With Facebook, it's for old people.
Twitter.
Twitter is just dying. That's a whole other. More than likely at some point we will see a need for Discord dissipate. But at that point, there will probably be other platforms that teens will be advocating for, and we can luckily just hop that train. We already have a basic framework for how to tell admin this is what we need, and hopefully whatever they choose this time will be just as useful and easy for us to pick up and run with.
Yeah. And again, I think I just mentioned that as well. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's again checking in with those teens, right, that are on the server. We mentioned the story of teens at the end of our first summer on Discord asking if it would stick around, and we were super happy to support that. If it gets to the point where we notice that teens just aren't doing anything or they're not asking for it anymore, we certainly, just like with many things in teen services, everything's always in fluctuation, especially with the teen population, right? Interests change, technologies change, all those things change. So there will probably be a point where maybe it may not be Discord. But certainly, I think many of us have seen that in general at the library, there is a need for more of a virtual presence for teens and for other populations as well. So we'll certainly be there ready for teens to suggest where it is that we should be next, where we should meet them next, if that's what they want. So yeah, I think there are other platforms. At this time, I can't think of any that really exist in the way that Discord exists, or at least to the magnitude that Discord is. But certainly we'll keep our eyes and ears open for anything that comes along.
We've got just a few minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, please don't hold back. That's what we're here for. And again, check out the LibGuide, check out our emails, ask us questions you don't ask here. That's perfectly fine. If it's something you think will take longer to answer, we're more than happy to answer questions.
Yeah. Or if you see anything on the LibGuide and you want follow-up questions on that as well, certainly reach out to us and we'd be happy to chat.
To answer your question about specific suggestions of Discords.
Well, you can look,
yeah,
okay.
There.
Shannon's going to look up specific suggestions and I'll answer Meredith your question. So, we don't have like a hard limit necessarily for staff on which channels to or to not interact on. Really, the overarching thing is to think about, the conversations that are happening. If you see a teen asking a question and there's a lot of other teens chiming in, it's probably fine for the staff member not to interact with. And what we encourage our staff at the San Antonio Public Library to do is to use those emoji reactions to indicate that, hey, that's really cool that you got that new game, or you did that thing with your friends over the weekend, without having to insert themselves and necessarily say like, oh, that's awesome, you went to a haunted house, I love haunted houses. You can just thumbs up it or do a spooky ghost or whatever the case may be. So we don't limit staff to not talking or things like that. But again, just really being mindful of what it is that they're saying, if it's necessary for them to say that, or if it's really just something that teens should be responding to, is the best way.
So we don't really like have a hard limit. It's more of a like, hey, pay attention to how the flow of conversation is going. Are you just inserting yourself? Are you adding anything? That kind of thing. As far as Discords, there's one just called Teen Librarians. Very good, very Discord focused, lots of questions about programming and using Discord. And then there's one called Library Twitter, comes from Library Twitter. And that one's more general. You have people of all kinds of libraries on there, which is really great to get that span of experience. It's not as Discord focused, but it's nice as a community. So those are my two recommendations. And then to ask the question on utilizing bots, such as D&D bots for rolling, and in the channel, what other bots are useful? We do have Avray, which is the primary dice rolling bot. It's really neat if you have players who use D&D Beyond, because you can like link characters to Avray if they want to go through that effort. In D&D, I let them roll physical dice if they want. I'm going to trust them. That's my choice, though. A dice bot is nice to have. We also have just a ton of bots for various purposes. Yeah,
and on our LibGuide, we do have some of those recommendations in terms of like what bots are useful for moderation. There's lots of bots. There's bots for everything. There's bots for playing games. There's bots for, rolling dice or other things that you may need for those kinds of games. There's really, if you can think of a bot that's probably, or if you can think of a need for a bot, it's probably exists. You use it for polls and things like that. So you can certainly check our LibGuide for some of those bots that we use or that we recommend you at least take a look at to see what may work for your server.
That is time. We're at 2:16 now. We're a minute over. Oh no.
Thank you so much, Matthew and Shannon. That was really great. So everyone, we have our last 15-minute break. We'll be back at 3:30. In this room will be Mission Impossible, Deciphering Teen Behavior. So we'll see y'all back soon.
And I want to say thank you to Matthew and Shannon too. I know I was in the other session from Connecticut, but we finished early so I could sneak in. Thank y'all
Awesome.
for giving us some of your time.
Absolutely,
course.
Kim. Okay, thank you all so much for inviting us.
Yes.
We'll chat with y'all soon.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.